Square Enix, known for their video game series Final Fantasy. Today, we're going to be going to talk about the entire timeline of this game, where it started, where it ends, the low points and the high points. It's going to be a long story, and I'm deciding to split it into two different parts. I've been working on it all week, so anyway, let's go. So in this video, I'm going to be reviewing the games, almost all of them at least, and I'm going to be giving them a rating of 1 to 10. Some will be 0, probably none will be 0, but still. Anyway, let's get started. Square was a small company developing for the Nintendo Entertainment System. They produced games like Rad Racer and King's Knight, which is a piece of garbage. But even though Rad Racer may be a good game, Square was about to bite the dust. And in a last-ditch effort to save their company, they created Final Fantasy, which was a mild success in America and a hit in Japan. This saved Square altogether. Well, the reason this game was so good was because it was turn-based. With most RPGs, such as Dragon Quests, you couldn't really see. It was more of a first-person perspective, kind of like Earthbound on the Super Nintendo. But with this game, you could see this. You could see the swords. You were able to pick your own party classes. It was basically playing Dungeons and Dragons. It was a good hit, and it was released in America and Japan. It's about 4 crystals, which started the craze of 4 elemental power things, and you gotta save them all. But yeah, it was. Wow. I have to cut that one out. But it was a success in the end. I rate this one a 7 out of 10. Even though it is good and classic, it still has some flaws. The items aren't very well balanced. The item prices, and it's a very broken game. This may be a problem if you're playing on the original. Stick to the PlayStation version, because it was remastered. Don't play this one. Well, you can if you want to go old school, but still, it's very hard and glitchy. I can't even beat it. I can only beat it on the PlayStation 1. Anyway, moving on. Final Fantasy II came out 1 year later. Now here's the thing about Final Fantasy II. It wasn't released in America, which we don't know why. Maybe Nintendo of America didn't want it there. But it came out 1 year after Final Fantasy. Now this was a problem. It was a rush game. And, usually, a lot of companies would just throw a separate storyline on there, make it the same game with different perks, and call it Final Fantasy II, but Square didn't want to do that. They wanted to make a completely different game, and that's what they did. Instead of leveling up with all of your, characters getting stronger as you level up, it was a progress system, where every time you equipped an item and fought with the item, you would get better. Every time you got hit, your HP would be raised. Every time you used Cure, your Cure would get more powerful. Now, this was cool, but it wasn't done right. Now, you can use daggers, right? But you stop getting daggers halfway through the game. And there's a wand status that mages can use, but why would you have that when mages would use magic? It doesn't really make sense, and overall, the game isn't good. I give this one a 3 out of 10. It needs work. And yes, it has been redone, but the proficiency system is not work, the progress system, whatever you want to call it. It is not. Don't play this game. Maybe play the Game Boy Advance version, but you have to remember, it did put some staples into the series. Chocobos. But, oh well. The storyline was good, about an empire that that is using weapons to destroy cities and, hellspawn and everything. It was a very good storyline and it was pretty good. Anyway, moving on to Final Fantasy III, which is considered the definitive title in the series. Final Fantasy III took the good elements of 1 and 2 and mushed them together. And honestly, it works pretty good. Even though it's an extremely hard game, it's still a very good game. It's huge. I mean, the sheer size of this game is crazy that they could fit it on a cartridge. I mean, it's crazy, man. But here's the thing. It wasn't released in America either. Yeah. Even though with Final Fantasy II still being released in 1999 on the Origins, I don't know if that's correct, but it wasn't released until 2006 on the DS. Wow. That's crazy, man. I mean, anyway, who cares? Honestly, it may be a pretty big, maybe a little long time, maybe 17 years, but who cares? Anyway, Final Fantasy III is a good game. Instead of using a proficiency system, it used a job class system, which has only been used one more time in Final Fantasy V, which we will get to. But the game went back to just its regular leveling up system, and it went back to the crystals, to the 4 elemental crystals. And honestly, it isn't a bad game. It is an extremely ruthless and hard game, though. It is one of the hardest games on the NES, I would say. And honestly, Final Fantasy might already be the hardest trilogy of games, maybe even harder than Ninja Gaiden. But that isn't challenge. It's more of your patience. The only thing is, the Final Fantasy games on the NES are broken. But were kind of good. They were new and tried out new things that, weren't seen yet. And honestly, with the hit of Final Fantasy III in Japan, Square was ready to strike back. Final Fantasy IV in Japan. This game took a step to the 16-bit console, the Super Nintendo, which was great. It was good. It was the greatest idea I think Square's had yet. Anyway, well, Final Fantasy IV was a hit in Japan, but still didn't really catch on in America. And since 2 and 3 weren't released in America, it was Final Fantasy II in America. So, yeah, this was kind of confusing when Final Fantasy VII came out, but still, this game is good. It still is about the crystals, not 4 elemental crystals, 18 crystals. 18. Yeah, there's a lot of crystals in this game. But still, it was huge, and, well, it was huge to the people who have only played the previous 3 in Japan. It was a good game. Except for in America, it was watered down, and it's easy. It's really easy. Don't play this version. At least get yourself a Super Famicom and play it. But if you don't want to do that, then just get it on the PlayStation 1 in Final Fantasy Chronicles. It's much better. It's actually real. But anyway, I give the rating of Final Fantasy IV an 8 out of 10. It still has its flaws, and there isn't really a lot of character development. Anyway, so, RPGs weren't catching on in America. This was a problem for Square. So, they did something. They made a beginner RPG, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which took the place of Final Fantasy V that wasn't released in America either. Final Fantasy V is a good game, again resorting to the 4 elemental crystals, and it was actually the last game to be about the 4 elemental crystals. It wasn't the last one until Final Fantasy IX, which brought back the crystal. Final Fantasy IX was the last game that had the crystal. But anyway, Final Fantasy V used the job class system, like 3. It basically buffed it all out. It was better in every single way. You know, graphics-wise, job classes, the story was better. I mean, character development overall is better. Well, sadly, the good game that I would rate 8 out of 10, still has its flaws, wasn't released in America either. What is this? But in place of it, we got Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, which was a beginner RPG. And I don't just mean a beginner RPG. I mean, this was the easiest RPG ever. Even easier than Final Fantasy II in America. What were they thinking? Why would they make this? And even though, you know, it was sort of a good idea to do it, it flopped still. It only released, well, I don't know how much it sold, but I would rate this game 4 out of 10. It's stupid, and you can beat it in 10 hours. So, Square said, you know what? Screw this. Let's just release all the titles like they should be. Final Fantasy VI was released for the Super Famicom, and named Final Fantasy III on the Super Nintendo. And this game was what made role-playing games a mainstream. This is the best, my favorite game in the entire series. It isn't about the crystals. It goes back to a more of a Final Fantasy II standard, where it's an empire, you know, abusing their power, and it turns into, you know, a crazy lunatic dude who steals power from the Espers. It's a masterpiece, and honestly, I would play this game anytime. Well, Chrono Trigger Secret of Mana was released, and Super Mario RPG, which just topped off the ice cream with whipped cream. Those 3 games were hits everywhere. Honestly, I would rate Final Fantasy VI to be a 10 out of 10 game. I would say there aren't any flaws, even though there might be little ones, but still, it is the definitive title of all the games released on all the Nintendo consoles. Oh yeah, all the Nintendo consoles. We'll have to get to that. So when the N64 was coming out, Final Fantasy, Square wanted more. They saw the PlayStation 1 coming out, and they thought, you know, maybe we should move over to CDs. They can hold more space, better graphics, and, you know, it was just a good idea. But it was a risk, and a good risk taken. Square changed to Squaresoft and made Final Fantasy VII, which is considered the best Final Fantasy game. In my opinion, it's my 3rd favorite Final Fantasy game. It's amazing. The storyline is amazing. The character development is amazing. For the time, the graphics were astounding. Across 3 CD-ROMs is a 40-hour game that you will love, Honestly, play this game next to 6 and maybe even 4. It's great. Even on the sets from Game Fan magazine, quite possibly the greatest game ever made, which that isn't true. There's many greater games than it, but still, it's a great game. Now, the great thing about this game is that it sold more in America than it did Japan. Even with it having outstanding sales in Japan, it sold more in America. And this is what Square, now Squaresoft, needed. Role-playing games was a mainstream in America now. Their dream came true. Honestly, I'd rate this game a 10 out of 10. It's definitive, and it's good. But what that would spawn would be Final Fantasy VII Advent Children, the movie, Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus, the game, and Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. These 3 games, this movie, Might have been the reason. But no, it wasn't. Anyway, we'll get to that. Final Fantasy VIII. This game is different, but it's still a fan favorite. It's not bad, but it's more realistic. Usually in Final Fantasy games, the characters are stubby, except for in the regular version. But still, this game, I wouldn't say a 10 out of 10. I'd say an 8 out of 10. It's a very good game. I mean, better than Final Fantasy II and Mystic Quest. But it has flaws. You have to buy magic in the game, and I don't really like that. I mean, it was used in 5, but that's about it. And that's kind of just stupid. Don't buy spells. And, overall, it's a pretty good game, but had some serious flaws in it. And then came Final Fantasy IX. The last of the trilogy of the games on the PlayStation 1. This game is freaking awesome. It's in my opinion, it's the best out of the 3 on the PlayStation 1. It has upgraded characters. It goes back to the classic Final Fantasy VII character design. The story is amazing. The characters are lovable and awesome and funny, and it adds comedy to a rather serious plot. I mean, an empire is about to take over the world, And honestly, this is my second favorite game in this series, with 1 being the first, and my third would be 7. It's just, I love this game. It's playable, and it's good. I'll rate this game a 9 out of 10. Sadly, yes. There's still one problem with it. Just kidding. I rate this game a 10 out of 10. There isn't a problem with it. It's a good game. Well, looks like it's going to be on to part 2. Or the end of part 1. Anyway, stay tuned for part 2.